That's right. That music can only mean one thing. It's time for Ghosty to take that stroll down memory lane and remember the women on television that used to light his fire. We talked about Nicole Eggert on Charles in Charge, and now we've got another show that hardly anyone remembers. If I bring it up to people, if I mention the title, they have no idea what I'm talking about, and this show is not on DVD at all.
Really?
It's never been released.
I actually went on YouTube, and I found it dubbed into, Croatian.
Yes, and that's the only way you can see all these complete episodes. You can watch the Croatian dub of Unhappily Ever After, created by one half of the team who created Married with Children. That would be Ron Leavitt.
1995 is a very big year because that's when the WB Warner Brothers creates their own network, the WB. Yes. The Warner Brothers needs programs to fill, and they create, that's where Hercules, Xena, The Action Pack, all these movies, Vanishing Sun, Midnight Run, Buffy, Seventh Heaven, Gilmore Girls. And so they're pretty much going to showrunners and creators and saying, what else do you have? Out comes Unhappily Ever After, which is pretty much a different version of Married with Children.
Yeah, it's essentially the same type of show, almost the exact same family setup. In fact, Jack on the show, I think, wears the same shirts that Al Bundy wears.
Yeah.
Except they have the added addition of a puppet voiced by Bobcat Goldthwait.
Mr. Floppy the Rabbit.
Yes.
What's interesting is that Jeff Pearson, who played Jack, who's gone on to a great career on film, TV, and he actually did a play here on the campus.
Oh, did he really?
When we had the American Stage Company.
Wow, I should have brought a Mr. Floppy puppet.
That was long before. But anyway, he had actually done an episode of Married with Children. Now, the show was a project for Stephanie Hodge.
That it was a vehicle for her initially.
She had a package. She was given a development deal.
Well, I'm assuming that Ron Leavitt and Michael G. Moy had development deals because Married with Children was on for 12 years.
It was, and it had done very well. Now, Stephanie Hodge, who had played the mother on Unhappily, was a very successful comedian, had been on a hit sitcom called Nurses on NBC. And she was getting more and more popular, and so they approached her and said, we want to do a show for you. And so she was thrilled, so she plays the Peg Bundy version.
Right.
But then everything changes.
Everything changes because they get Nikki Cox. And and it's clear within seconds of her walking down the stairs for the first time, much like on Married with Children when they would hoot and holler for Christina Applegate, except Christina Applegate never took over the show. They had the same family setup. They had the bickering husband and wife. The daughter was hot and sexy.
But smart.
Yeah. And the younger son, who what's the name of the kid? He went on to
Kevin Connolly.
Kevin Connolly.
Who was also directing episodes. He and Jeff Pearson were allowed to direct episodes. And interesting, the minute he starts directing, Nikki Cox starts dating him.
Right. Well, now, which came first? I know Nikki Cox dated him and she dated Bobcat Goldthwait.
Well, I think she dated him, then she broke up with him because then Bobcat, who was 20 years older than her, left his wife for her.
Wow.
And then they got married.
They did get married.
And then they got a divorce.
And then she married Jay Moore.
Yes.
I know that.
And they have a child.
Oh, okay. But she was just phenomenal on that show.
Well, she would just come down and wear these little dresses, but then they started giving her rivals.
Oh, yeah, Wendy Benson.
Wendy Benson was gorgeous.
Yeah.
And then she also had a friend on the show, but also Christiana Loken.
Christiana Loken, that's right. And I have at least a dozen of them on a VHS tape.
Really?
Yes. And the great thing, the Stephanie Hodge, her character was... Now, she was either written out or she wanted to leave.
I think she realized she got a sour deal. This was supposed to be her project, and no one cared about it.
And it became the Nikki Cox
show.
She
left.
She left, and then they decided to bring her back.
Yeah.
And their excuse, their reason for her leaving was that she had died.
Yes.
And so they decided to bring her back, so they brought her back as a ghost. And then in one of the weirdest television moments ever, Jack announces to the audience that the character was once a ghost and now she's going to be alive. Just go with it. Like breaking the fourth wall and saying there's going to be no explanation for this. Now she's back to life, and the last season didn't happen.
Well, the show made no sense also because the idea is that Jack has all these mental issues and rage, and that the child's Mr. Floppy doll, voiced by Bobcat Goldthwait, comes to life to him in his mind.
Yes, it's his conscience speaking to him. But he never struck me as some loose cannon on the show.
He really wasn't.
His problems didn't seem all that bad.
But all they ever did was talk about, he's like, oh, you don't want some guy like me going wild on a, It was like he was about to snap, but he never really did. And he had a nice house.
And I remember the audience going crazy, with every joke, and especially they went crazy whenever Nikki Cox jiggled into frame. I mean, and they did a lot of that. I mean, they exploited the heck out of Nikki Cox on that program.
They exploited her so much that a year after they ended, they gave her her own series called Nikki.
Yes.
Yeah, but at the same time, the show was so poorly written that I would just wait to see her, in her showgirl outfit. That
Luckily they did that at the very beginning, and the Nikki. The whole point of Nikki was that Nikki Cox, the WB thought of Nikki Cox as the next Lucille Ball.
Well, that was not. That was a
they
bad idea.
They were going to build a show around. Now, I maintain that that Nikki Cox, I think, was a decent comedian. I think she was fun. I think she had the chops. She could have gone. The problem is she was so beautiful that it's all you paid attention to.
And it's interesting because then after that show ended, she went right to Las Vegas.
James Caan on that
James
program?
Caan. She does a lot of voice work now.
Yeah, that's what she's doing these days.
We'll probably see her in the studio one day. It's sort of like, I'm going to say it again. It's very similar to Charles in Charge, which we discussed last week. Cute concept, nothing much, but you have a hot actress and guys like us who have, who live in our, imaginations and don't have it in us.
Don't reveal too much, James.
Guys like us who don't have it in us and don't have enough in our wallets to go to a real woman and ask her out. We can have our pretend.
Real woman. What? What are we dealing with? Blow up dolls? What are you saying?
Well, I talk to the television.
Talk to the television.
But
you know what? Here's the thing about Unhappily Ever After. I didn't watch it when it was first on.
I did.
Because I watched it when it was rerun late at night on Fox. Unhappily Ever After is one of those shows, if you're in the mood to watch Married with Children and it's not on, but this was on, you would sit and watch it.
Also,
you'd be satisfied. You'd say, okay, well, it's not Married with Children, but at least it's this.
But, the Married with Children producers were very good to their former cast because, like, Amanda Bierce, who played Marcy.
Yes.
Who went on to a very successful directing career.
And David Faustino was a guest on.
He was a guest, but also Amanda was directing episodes.
Yeah. Well, she directed episodes of Married with Children.
She directed like 40 episodes.
And it's funny because the controversy over Married with Children, people would say, oh, it's such a sexist show. It's such a guy's show. And meanwhile, Amanda Bierce is directing, Well, at some point, we'll have to get into Married with Children.
We will do
I think
one.
We're more familiar with Married with Children, although we certainly watched a lot of Unhappily Ever After.
I watched all of Unhappily, but only for one reason.
I know. That needs to be on DVD.
The comedian Ant was on the show. He always played her best friend.
Well, you learn something new every day, but boy, what legs on Nikki Cox.